This story was sent to me by one of my subscribers. Whether it was in fact or fiction, or maybe there was something similar, it was just blown up and embellished by eyewitnesses of those events. In general, let's listen, and then everyone will decide for himself. In the small American town of Sterling Field, located in the interior of the state, stands a gloomy building, a former psychiatric hospital, Green Hill. It was closed in the 1980s, and since then was still shrouded in legends of terrible experiments and tragic cases. However, in the early 2000s, it was decided to renovate the abandoned hospital building and turn it into a school for local children. In the first months, everything seemed to go as usual and nothing seemed to portend any misfortune. But then strange events began to happen. Students and adults working at the school often heard strange noises, small things began to disappear, and children talked about seeing ghosts. No one took them seriously at first until 3 younger students and their teacher disappeared. In a panic, the local authorities turned to the police for help. A young detective named Michael Hall led the investigation. He was ambitious and energetic, as he had recently graduated from the police academy with honors. He took on this strange case with determination. As it later turned out, as Mikhail began his investigation, he came across some horrifying findings in the archives of the former Green Hill Psychiatric Hospital. The archival records contained gruesome details of medical experiments conducted on patients, which bordered on torture of the patients and were conducted by highly questionable methods. It seemed that the chief physician in charge of the hospital practiced some kind of occult practices. The patients' case histories indicated that many of them were not mentally ill. There were records of fatalities during treatment, scandals about the disappearance of patients surfaced, but these were also hushed up. It became clear to the investigators that the hospital's past was much worse than anyone had realized. The investigator got into the hands of the diaries of the hospital staff, which described senseless and sinister experiments conducted with patients. There were records of the strange inhabitants of the hospital and their manic behavior, as well as the terrible hallucinations that the test patients had. As the investigation progressed, Michael became immersed in the atmosphere of fear and mystery that surrounded Green Hill. While searching and examining the school, bricked-up doors leading to the basement rooms were discovered. One of the bricked-up secret passageways led the investigators to a subterranean room where they found remains of decayed bodies and various objects that indicated that ritual murders had been carried out here. Michael himself was an atheist, but faced with this horrifying reality and the facts presented in the archival documents, began to think about the existence of God. All the facts and events of the black mystery, shrouded in a dark atmosphere all around, made him come to the local church for the first time in his life. He had already seen many of the crimes committed by people in his professional life, robbery and theft and even murder, but here it was different. Something frightening, infernal and incomprehensible to the common man frightened Michael, not letting him sleep well. Here, he and the investigation encountered traces of strange rituals, which in some cases included sacrifices and worship of otherworldly forces. Michael began to communicate with the local priest and residents of the town, who told him about the rumors and legends associated with the Green Hill mental institution. From them, he also learned that the professor himself, Gerald P., had disappeared shortly after the hospital closed, and the investigation began. 6 months later, the investigation was closed as well. It was rumored that among the acquaintances of the professor were very high-ranking and influential people who helped to silence the case. More than a week had passed, and there were still no results from the investigation. There was a lot of information and facts from the dark past of the former hospital. However, this did not bring the investigation team any closer to the end of the search for the missing children and the teacher. Parents and relatives were beginning to lose hope, and Michael himself was beginning to despondent. The investigation seemed to have reached a dead end, Deciding to once again review the archival documents, Michael found that in the records about the professor himself was a mention of his wife, who also worked with him in the hospital. As the record showed, his wife was almost 20 years younger, but as a result of in a car accident, she died, leaving behind a 1-year-old daughter. A daughter, the professor's daughter, he had completely forgotten about. Michael began frantically flipping through the professor's diaries and soon found an old, yellowed photograph of a little girl. On the back of the photo was the inscription, Sophia. The first time he studied the professor's diaries, he didn't pay attention to this photo. How many photos he had already looked at of patients in the hospital. The number of different photos had already made his eyes blurry. Now realizing that this was the photo he had overlooked, Michael stared at the photo. She was about 5, 6 years old. Looking at the photo and looking at the child's face, Michael realized that he had seen this face somewhere before. And then, a sudden realization hit him. He quickly opened his briefcase and pulled out the files on the missing students and teacher. At the sudden discovery, he almost fell out of his chair. In the photo of the children and their teacher, a much older Sophia looked up at him. End of part 1. The continuation follows. Subscribe to the channel not to miss the continuation of this story. You can also listen to a lot of interesting stories on our Silent Horror channel. Although the channel is young, but we promise it will be interesting and scary. It will be scary interesting. You can also send your stories, and then other people will also be able to hear them.